journey beyond imposter syndrome. This is where I invite you into a space where high achievers and spiritual leaders converge to redefine success and self-worth. By sharing transformative stories and engaging with thought leaders, this podcast serves as a roadmap for navigating the complexities of imposter syndrome. It's an intimate look into overcoming personal barriers tailored for those who value wisdom, leadership, and intuition in business and life. Join me at the Humble Warrior Podcast with Alani Bankhead. Welcome to the Humble Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Alani Bankhead. And guys, today we're going to have some real talk, okay? And I know some of you are going to get upset by what I have to say, but I am saying this in love because I want you to grow as an individual. So first of all, most of my listeners are in kind of the Western Hemisphere. So whether it's the United States or Europe or Canada, I need to drop a truth that you are so damn lucky to be born in Western society. I want to share the story of a terrorism informant I had named Ali. That's what we're going to call him. So Ali was a guy that I met with. He was actually a car bomb maker, and he had been known to be responsible for killing U.S. service members. I had the pictures of the service members that he killed. He was somebody that we got intelligence about. So he was a double agent. So he worked for Al Qaeda, but obviously he was taking payments from us. A lot of money, by the way, like minimum $10,000 per target. It was super crazy. But anyway, so Ali, it's weird coming into those situations because you see somebody like that and you're like, you're my sworn enemy. And this wasn't that long after 9/11. And so you're still fresh off the emotion of all that. And this war's been going on. But what I discovered the more I sat down with Ali and got to know him, because that's part of our job, is that Ali really wasn't that different from you and I. He was a human being. He had kids that he loved and that he wanted them to thrive. Ali had some problems, probably as a result of the very terrible things that he was doing. But either way, he was bright. He was super smart. And looking at him, I remember thinking, man, if you had been born in any other country, basically in the world, you probably would have been an engineer. You could have been designing cars or doing whatever computer system stuff for them. He was that intelligent. But instead, because he was born in a war-torn country, he had to make his living or chose to make his living making car bombs. And so that made me super insanely grateful to be American, that I won the genetic lottery to have been born American. And I share that first with you guys because oftentimes it's so easy to get stuck in our bubble, right? Everybody around us is similar to us. We have similar upbringings. And we often feel like we're comparing ourselves to people who have our similar cultural and national background. But the reality is, when you look at the bigger picture, we are incredibly lucky. We are a country of abundance. Western society is very abundant. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of differentiating between the United States and maybe some European countries. I dated a guy back in the day who was born in a European country. I'm not going to say which one. And he actually went to school in this European country. And in this country, they had a system where around junior high, you were classified as either a white collar worker or you were on track to be a blue collar worker. And so his family ended up moving him to my American school because he'd been classified as a blue collar track person, and his parents wanted to give him more opportunities. He had American citizenship, he had dual citizenship. And so that's how I got to know him. Now, we know people can be late bloomers. The idea that you would be classified at such a young age to potentially do a job that maybe you didn't want to do was super bananas to me. And so again, having this bigger perspective on the gifts that you've been given, despite your difficult circumstances, right? I'm not negating that everybody struggles. That's the point of the podcast, is to talk through what those struggles look like. But we need to really take stock of the realities of what it is that we're experiencing. In another case, personal to me, I have been responsible for overseeing lots of commercial sexual exploitation of children cases or child sex trafficking, where in other countries, people in positions of power did unspeakable things. And it wasn't just that they committed this heinous crime, but those countries or those towns were so corrupt that the police chief, everybody was in this leader's pocket, and there was really no justice for the children, which is why we were there. And these are all things we take for granted. Now, I'm not saying that Western government is perfect by far. Obviously, we have work to do and we can always improve, right? But my point is that when we hear these stories, we're reminded that we are one person, a tiny speck on this planet in a giant universe that's full of so many other people and things and beings besides us. And that's our strategic perspective. Now, I want to bring it to the tactical level. So I want to bring it down to the ground level, you and me, so we can talk about what's going on in your brain and in your heart. The second truth bomb I want to drop for you is you can only give others love in proportion to the love that you feel for yourself. I'm going to say that again because it's worth repeating. You can only give other people love in direct proportion to the love that you have for yourself. And so, why this is an interesting point to me is because it's very paradoxical as it relates to our imposter syndrome. Our imposter syndrome is constantly demanding external validation, right? It's saying we're not good enough, we're not qualified for the positions, titles, accolades, or whatever thing that we're doing or want to do. And those of you who are listening to my podcast are heart-centered world changers. So you guys want to be of service. You want to do everything in your power to make the world a better place. And that is amazing. But your inner imposter is actually robbing you of your ability to self-actualize and achieve the craziest, most amazing life possible because you are so much in this unhealthy ego, which is what your inner imposter syndrome is right now. So it's dictating your emotions and behaviors, not the other way around. Now, you guys have heard me talk in the past about your inner imposter actually points you to your greatest power, which it does. But that is under the assumption that we understand how it works and that we are in control and that we know how to harness it to work for us. For most of you that are listening right now, it's telling you what to do. It's saying you're not good enough. It's whispering in your ear, telling you how you have to overwork and prove your value to people. And the crazy thing is, you are probably a really high achiever. You get the awards, you get the positive validation, you get the promotions, and they might feel good for a split second, but over time, that fades away and you're back to feeling like garbage. And so my entire mission is to rid the world of fear and make sure that when you can do that, you are making decisions from an empowered, inspired place of love and true service to the people that you are called to serve and encourage. Okay. Now, here's the thing is at this point, if your imposter syndrome is dictating your actions, I'm here to tell you it's never going to be satisfied. So a lot of you are like, yeah, Lonnie, but I'm still doing pretty well. It's not fun, but I'm doing okay. I'm going to tell you that over time, it's going to wear on you to a point where it's so painful, you're going to have to change or you're going to go crazy. I'm giving you the opportunity now to start on that journey, but if you're not ready, no problem. Keep listening to the podcast. But have you ever had a friend or a loved one who just sucked the joy out of their relationship with their neediness? They're constantly like, are you happy with me? Did I do something wrong? Hey, you tell me if I did something wrong, right? Or can you tell me how much you need me? It's just obnoxious because you're like, I love you. Of course, I want you to know that you're important, but nothing I say or do is going to make you believe it until you believe it first. That's exactly how your inner imposter operates. You can sit there and get all the external validation that you want, and you will have a very successful career on the outside, but you're never actually going to be fulfilled. You're going to be low-key miserable, but you're going to keep doing it because it works for you. Remember, your inner imposter has actually benefited you a lot because it pushes you to achieve and to self-actualize and to get the mission done no matter what. You're the go-to person, you're the fixer. You love all those things because it makes you feel needed. by your teams and your bosses and your coworkers and your kids or whatever it might be. But you will never feel at peace. You will never feel full joy if you do not get a grip on your inner imposter syndrome. So, the irony of this entire situation, as I previously alluded to, is that you actually only want to serve and love on other people yourself, but you're actually limiting what you're truly capable of because you're making all of these decisions from a place of fear rather than a place of joy. As an example, when I was younger, I would self actualize. Let's say I was talking to Ali, right? I was super scared in that first deployment because I was nervous and I wanted to do a good job and I wasn't actually scared of dying, but I was scared of being told that I did a bad job. Isn't that so crazy how our imposter messes with our heads? And so everything I was doing was more, I have to achieve and do the right thing and get this operation done so that I can get that external validation from other people. And when I didn't get it, I was really upset. And I thought there was something wrong with me. And I ruminated and overthought and all of those things. And for my high achievers, as I previously mentioned, you actually have zero incentive to change because you're already successful. And I do run into people like this who are like, man, I'm exhausted. I'm burning the candle at all the ends. My kids are suffering. My marriage is suffering, or my partnership is suffering, and my work is suffering. I can't sustain this. But when I offer them these tools, they're like, oh, no, that's like too uncomfortable. I'd have to rest and learn how to, you know, ask for what I need, and I don't want to do that. Okay, fine, then don't. Have fun being miserable. And maybe you'll be ready down the road, and I'm going to be here. But who I'm here for today are the people who are fed up with living the way that they are, and they are ready to make the change and ready to self actualize. And yes, my methods might sound ridiculous to the overfunctioning brain because they're very spiritual and intuitive in nature. And that's fine if it doesn't resonate you. There are other imposter syndrome coaches out there. Go check them out. I'm not actually here for you, and that's okay. And so I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about the very first step, which is actually the most important step to overcoming your inner imposter syndrome. And that is we are going to identify your imposter syndrome statement. What that means is, and we're going to have to go back to basic psychology, and I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to say it again. Basic cognitive theory, the cognitive triangle, says that thoughts lead to emotions, which lead to behaviors. And when I have a thought, it dumps chemicals into my body, which creates an emotion. And then that emotion leads to a certain behavior. Now, your inner imposter, for the most part, is very subconscious. It's been running on loop in your head for years or even decades, and you don't realize it's there. But if you've said things like, I feel stuck, I don't know what else to do, those are big red flags that you have imposter syndrome dictating your day-to-day behaviors. And so I am going to talk through how I identified my own inner imposter. And it was years and years after I was initially successful. I got a promotion that basically, I wouldn't say my career was on easy street, but I had made it for all intents and purposes. And I looked around and I was like, there's got to be more to life and my career than this. Like, I've been killing myself and I made it, and I'm not happy, and I have to do something different. And over time, I started doing this work. I heard during a presentation what imposter syndrome was. It impacts 70% of people. And I was looking around the room like, 70% of you have this and nobody's talked about it. I was so mad, right? And so as I continued to do research on what imposter syndrome was, what I discovered was that this thought was predicated by the idea that I am or I am not. So for me, it was I am too female, too small, too Hispanic, or too brown, and I'm too young looking. And so I had 4 key imposter syndrome statements, and all of those had an underlying encompassing imposter statement, which was I don't matter. So whether it was special operations or doing my protective service operations, which is the proper term for bodyguard, or doing my counterintelligence work, whatever it might be. I constantly felt like I wasn't good enough for any of those missions because I didn't look the part. And because I didn't look the part, I didn't matter. And I really white knuckled my way to getting the success that I did. But the reality is that even though I look good on paper, supposedly, for a long time, I would look at my resume and intellectually I understood it looked good, but in my heart, I felt like a failure because I never felt like I was fully respected or appreciated, but I also wasn't appreciating myself. And so I've touched very briefly on spiritual beliefs. And so I'm going to share with you my personal spiritual belief. You don't have to pick up this belief. You are welcome to find another one that serves you better. But it hit me like a brick wall one day when I was doing my quiet time. So I try to connect with my higher power, who's God. I follow Christianity. And that typical Bible verse, it's so the greatest commandment, it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. So, like, the big rule is just love God with everything that you have, do the best that you can. And then it said, and the second commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we have all heard this in some form or fashion since we were probably kids. But on this day, the very last part of that sentence like jumped out at me on the page. So it said, love your neighbor. And I remember being like, I don't love myself very much because the thoughts that I had about myself were very toxic and frankly, they were abusive, right? So, all the same things a lot of you experience. I'm so fat. I'm not pretty. Nobody takes me seriously. Why would they? I'm not worthy of all kinds of things. My brain was just in overdrive all the time of all the reasons why I was a piece of garbage. And I would try to fight it. But that day, what I realized was if I want to truly love my neighbor, so if I want to truly love and serve these kids who at the time I was doing child sex crimes work, then I need to love myself first. I need to do the self care things that fill me up so that I can love them more. And the transformation that happened was pretty incredible. I'm not ashamed to say it because I'm a human being. There are parts of my past that I'm not super proud of. When I was frustrated and I felt stuck, law enforcement can be so dramatic. Oh my gosh, so drama. And there were one or two personalities where over the course of my career, I would get so frustrated because they exhibited maybe one or two really toxic leadership traits. So, talking trash is one. There was somebody I knew who would talk trash about everybody to everybody else, and everybody knew this. And I never had the brass ovaries to go to them and say, hey, can we talk about this? Because I know that's not your intent, but this is the way that it's coming off and it's hurting the team. Instead, what I did was I talked trash to my coworkers as a mechanism to blow off steam because I felt stuck. I didn't know what else to do. And so what I realized was, as I started doing this work, I could see the pain that they were in. I could empathize with their experience, and they absolutely were doing the very best that they could. But anybody who's talked trash knows that it's an outlet to let stress go, right? Now it's like the trashy TV of the self care space. Like, you might feel good for a split second, but in the long term, you feel terrible because you're talking trash about somebody and not living in integrity, or at least I was. And I'm the kind of person, if I have an issue, I'm going to tell you to your face. But for some reason, these one or two people, I just had a really hard time doing that. And it was because I didn't feel like I was worthy enough to have that hard conversation with them because I was always trying to prove my personal worth to them. And so when we are able to do that internal work and love ourselves, and it is a process, you guys, and that's a caveat I also want to make, is everything that I'm teaching is not hard to do. It's very simple. So my 5-step process, it's actually highlighted in my book. I'm going to go through the podcast explaining it. You can pick up my book if you want more detail. But the process and the tools are super, super easy, but so is working out, right? It's just that people have a hard time implementing and executing day to day. We all know we need to eat more greens, move our bodies more, sleep better, hydrate. But yet we still find ourselves reaching for that junk food, right? And let's go back to, that was a whole big circuitous route to get to. identifying your inner imposter. So I am too small, too female, too brown, and too young looking were mine. And so, on average, the clients that I've worked with have between 3 and 5 of these imposter syndrome statements. And about half of them have some overarching, like, I don't matter, or I have zero value, I'm worthless kind of imposter syndrome statement. And once you have understood what that I am statement or what those I am statements are, now your world is changed forever. I'm not saying you're going to feel a seismic shift necessarily, but what I am telling you is now that you have awareness around what that statement is saying, you can't go back to not knowing. And now you're going to start to notice when that fear creeps up, right? So, cognitive triangle, our thoughts lead to emotions, which lead to our behaviors. And so, that identification of your inner imposter is by far the most powerful tool because now you have to change. And so, what's going to happen when you start this process? So, first, you're probably like, oh my gosh, Alani, this sounds crazy. Yeah, it might be a little bit crazy, but let's keep it real. Your brain's trying to keep you safe. It's telling you all these things because if you actually lived out your truest life purpose and you self actualized, you would be taking big risks. And what your brain wants you to do is not take that action so that you don't hurt yourself. Because if you fail at your life purpose, then what are you going to do? And so you recognize that your brain is trying to keep you safe when it tells you Alani's wrong. She's saying stupid things. Don't listen to her. But you guys, I promise you, once you experience the freedom from your inner imposter, you are going to run towards and embrace who you were truly meant to be. And you're going to realize that all of this was available to you this entire time. And you will be able to give love and do amazing work because your cup is going to be so overflowing with the amount of love that you have for yourself, right? Now, when I first discovered what my imposter statements were, I got really sad. Realizing that I had that level of disdain and hate for myself was just really sad because we're in general very loving people. But recognize that you're doing the very best you can. And these processes of growth will reveal to us things that we've kept in darkness that have to come to the light. And I love the way physics works because the physics of light indicate that light is the best disinfectant. So it doesn't matter what bacteria is existing. For the most part, if you get light on it for long enough, it's going to kill anything that's unhealthy. And the same thing holds true with your inner thoughts. Once you bring those unhelpful thoughts from the subconscious to your conscious brain, now the magic starts happening. Now you start to question, is this really serving me? And if it's not, what other thought do I want to replace it with? And now some of you might have so much self-hate that it feels impossible to shift those thoughts. And that's completely normal. I was the same way too. I had actually put about 30 pounds of weight on because of my inner imposter syndrome. I ate and drank all of that weight on myself. But what I didn't realize was happening was I had tried all these different things. I felt really stuck. So I used food and alcohol as a coping mechanism to numb some of that pain. And so I put all this weight on. And so I woke up one day and was like, oh, I'm really unhealthy. And I would look in the mirror and try to find something about myself that I liked, and I couldn't see anything until finally I think I was like, oh, I really like my shoulders or something like that. Or I think I said I had nice nails was the first thing. It's such an arbitrary thing, but that was the only thing I could start with on my journey of learning how to fill my cup back up and start to turn my inner imposter around. I'm so thankful now that all these years later, I have a completely different perspective of myself. When I see pictures of myself from back in the day, I have so much sympathy for that person because, man, I just worked my ass off and I did the very best that I could. And now I know better. And it feels good to be able to know better and do better and to teach these tools to you guys. And so we're actually going to jump ahead to tool number 2 as well. So you have named your inner imposter syndrome statement. So I am, and by the way, the 2 most common ones are I am not smart enough and I don't have the right credentials. So that is by far those are by far the two imposter syndrome statements that are most common amongst people that I see. And I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands of people at this point. And so once you know what that statement is, now, again, we're going to go a little bit crazy, but I want you to give it a persona. I want you to give it a name. And so my imposter syndrome, the I don't matter one, I named him the mayor of Whoville after the movie How the Grinch Stole Christmas. So the Jim Carrey version, right? That movie came out, what, 3 decades ago or something like that. And I remember when that movie first came out, it was so delightful. It's one of my all-time favorite Christmas movies. And for those who haven't seen the movie in the past, the premise is the town of Whoville is getting ready for Christmas. And little Cindy Lou Who is being told that Christmas is all about presents and things and food, but something intuitively. So there's a spiritual element in Cindy Lou Who that tells her maybe Christmas is about something other than material things. And so she sets out to experiment, and she ends up inviting this outcast Grinch into the town festivities because she wants to create community. She thinks that's actually the true spirit of the holidays. Now, fast forward, the Grinch's arch nemesis is the town mayor, and they have history. And this mayor has poked some open wounds still in the Grinch. The Grinch retaliates, steals Christmas, and there's a scene where the entire town wakes up Christmas morning to discover that Christmas has been stolen, like every little thing. And the mayor turns to Cindy Lou and says, "This is what we get for listening to a little good for nothing girl." And I remember the first time I heard that statement, I can still feel the pinch in my heart. And I didn't know what was happening. It took me a long time to figure it out. But what I realized was that was my inner imposter statement. That was its exact message. Now, as the viewer, we're watching this happen. You and I know that Christmas isn't actually about things. It's about family and community. And Cindy Lou is actually right. But this person in a position of authority told her that she was wrong and that she was responsible for ruining Christmas. And so that ties into, so naming our imposter syndrome. And side note, you cannot name your inner imposter after your mother-in-law. Absolutely not. You cannot name it after somebody who you know in real life. It has to be a cartoon character or TV character or movie character or somebody that isn't really real or that you don't have a direct tie to, because we don't want to conflate real relationship with what's going on in your head. So once you have identified and named your inner imposter, so we have an imposter statement or multiple statements, and we have different personalities for our inner imposter syndrome. Why naming your imposter syndrome and giving it a separate persona is actually a very powerful tool is because right now it feels like it's part of you. So it feels like it's your inner psyche talking to you, but the reality is that it's something you created to keep you small and keep you safe. And so now that we've given it a different name and it's a different character, we can start to interact with it differently. And I'm really excited to share with you in a future podcast episode what other steps you can take. It's going to be amazing. It changes things for so many clients that I've had, and I know you're going to love it. Remember, it's like between 3 and 5 imposter statements. So I've had people that named their imposter trio Chloe, Kim, and Courtney after the Kardashians because they had a lot of self-hate directed to them in terms of physical judgment. I had someone who had a very critical mother as a child, and Marlena Grew from Despicable Me turned out to be their imposter syndrome voice. So Marlena Grew is a very critical mother of the main character Grew. And once we've identified what this character is, we want to tie it to an origin story. Oftentimes, that imposter syndrome started when we were much younger, and it probably came to life in our teen years or even in our adult years. For me, I ended up experiencing my imposter syndrome deeply for the first time when I was in college. I had a professor who, long story short, told me I would never amount to anything, that I wouldn't graduate, I wouldn't commission. And that lit a fire under my butt to want to prove him wrong. And I still joke today that I wish he'd been there my freshman year because I would have probably graduated at the top of my class. And I did go on to do the things he said I wasn't going to do because I wanted to show him what was up, right? But what I didn't realize was that inner imposter syndrome was born and it was chasing me for the next 12 plus years. Everywhere I was, I heard him in my ear saying, "You're not good enough. You're never going to amount to anything. Who do you think you are?" And I really struggled to create the life I wanted. And your imposter origin story is deep down somewhere. Maybe in hearing this, you already know what it is. Maybe you don't know. And I don't want you to stress out if you don't. So we have planted a seed in your psyche. And I want you to trust that your brain, remember, you are a brilliant overachiever. You get things done. You know how to make magic happen. So trust that your brain is going to make that magic happen for you. So we've already told it, hey, can you identify that original story when that came up? So if you guys know what that is, DM me. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how that event birthed your imposter syndrome statements and how they've affected you today. And then in future podcasts, we are going to talk about the other 3 steps of my process. Again, this is not a put it on a little silver platter and make it perfect. And there's a little red bow and it's all nice and neat. Life is messy. So get ready to get messy and rumble. But I promise it's going to be the most beautiful rumble. It's going to be so worth it for you. And so, just so you guys know, some stories that have come up in the past with my own clients. So as they started this process, because I want you to know some of the results that you potentially will get. So I had one client who she was a contractor, but she was actually ghosting clients. People wanted to hire her and she would not respond because ultimately the work she was doing was tied to her life purpose and she didn't want to let them down. So she would literally run away. And when we did this work of uncovering what that inner imposter statement was and what the origin story was, she had an aha moment. She showed up to session 2 and said, I had a breakthrough. And I just made back my entire investment in your coaching program and then some because I accepted these 2 contracts because I didn't have to run away because now I understood what was going on. And I'm going to start raising my rates because I'm starting to see that I'm really valuable and people do actually want my services and I can provide a valuable solution to them. And so I had another client who actually ended up starting her own business. Actually, I've had a few clients do this. So they would be working other people's mission. They would want certain job titles or certain positions, and they would apply and work really hard and get feedback. And they'd be told, oh, if you have this certification or if you do this type of job, you'll be more competitive. They would do all the things. They would spend years, some of them more than a decade, trying to get to where they wanted. And they'd show up to me frustrated because they're like, I don't know what else to do. I've killed myself for these people. But the more we did the work, the more we discovered that really they had an alternate path they needed to go on where they started to create their own success in the mission and provide the solutions they knew their communities needed. And that really the time to serve someone else's mission had come and gone. And so, if you feel like you've been ignored and dismissed for a long time, if you feel like there's a job that you want to do, let's talk. I do a lot of career coaching as well. And now that client is serving their community in a way that they know they deserve to be served. And she's creating her own schedule. It is just so fun to watch her do her own thing as a business owner and create the freedom for her and her family that she really wants. Another client I had actually got his dream job in the federal government. And so the reason why he wasn't getting any bites on his applications was a little bit was technical. There were a couple things with how he was doing his resume that needed to be adjusted. No big deal. But the bigger issues were he would say things like, oh, but I had this legal issue back in the day, and I'm worried they're going to disqualify me. And that would stop him from applying for the jobs he wanted. And I finally was like, let them tell you no, right? If they don't want you because of whatever stuff happened in your past, I promise you they will let you know. But they're not going to come arrest you for something that you already addressed, maybe from a law enforcement standpoint. And so these are the kinds of things that prevent us from achieving the life that we want. Me personally, after I blew up my career, I got hired into, at the time, the nonprofit of my dreams. I worked child sex trafficking and child sex abuse cases all over the world. I became a deputy commander of a massive regional area where I trained hundreds of law enforcement officers and intelligence analysts. And it literally started with, you know what? I'm going to put my ego to the side. I will sweep floors and make coffee for you guys. Like, I just wanted to volunteer a little bit. Next thing I know, I'm hired and I'm running large scale operations. The point being that we need to get out of our own way and be of service in a way that is authentic to us in order for us to create the life that we really want. Okay. Once again, yes, the methods that I use might not seem normal, but how well has normal been working for you, my friend? So these are very simple tools that we talked about today, rooted in psychology and neuroscience. So remember, identify your imposter syndrome statement. It's usually tied to your life purpose. If you don't know what your life purpose is, that's totally okay. I have a freebie, so it's in the show notes, or you can DM me life purpose on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. And when you start to work this process, you will start to reverse the hateful thoughts that you've been having about yourself. And so, if you want more resources, check out my website, www.mightysparrowcoaching.com. I have video prompts for that life purpose guide that I mentioned earlier, or you can check out my best-selling book, The Least of Us, How Your Imposter Syndrome Points to Your Greatest Power. It's available at all major book retailers. If you guys have read it and loved it, please leave me a review. If you like this podcast, please leave me a review. It helps us get the word out so that we can help empower and inspire people so that they can provide the amazing badass solutions that they have for the world. Unfortunately, by the time this podcast comes out, it's going to be too late to join my end of year financial mindset event, where I'm going to teach you how your emotions actually drive your financial decisions. But you can get yourself on the wait list for next year's group coaching program, which starts in January 2025, and it is going to be focused on money. So whether you're too terrified to look at your credit score, or if you're a little bit more advanced and have some decent financial processes in place, but you're ready to really invite the abundance in because you want to create something incredible, sign up for my wait list, also in the show notes, or DM me group coaching. And all the links, everything we talked about, some of these tools are available in our show notes. Until next time, humble warriors, please remember the world needs who you were made to be. Thank you for joining me today on this journey to discover how you can harness your inner imposter syndrome to work for you. I love you guys. See you next time. If you enjoyed this episode and would like some help overcoming your imposter syndrome, check out the free life purpose exercise on my website and subscribe to my blog. If you already know what your life purpose is and are ready to crush or harness your imposter syndrome, then you're going to love my best-selling book, The Least of Us, How Your Weakness Points to Your Greatest Power, available on Amazon and all major book retailers. Or you can hit me up at alani@mightysparrowcoaching.com to discuss private coaching or corporate and government training. That's ALANI@mightysparrowcoaching.com. Listen, there's only ever been one you, and there will only ever be one you. And you have a specific gift to give that the world desperately needs. Don't let your self-doubt be the thing preventing you from living your most joyful and impactful life. Until next time, I'm always cheering you on.